Hello quad folks. Today's project is I'm going to modify the overhead bridge from a RCA TR-22 to a TR-70B. And what that mainly consists of is on the TR-70s, there's a little cutout here in each of the sections that allows for the connectors, the extensions that are not present on a TR-22, these extensions. And this top edge here sits at the bottom of the bridge when it's mounted on the frame, and these extensions extend up in to each of the holes. And so there's a little bit of metal needs to be taken out of each of these sections to allow for those extensions to extend up inside the bridge when it's sitting on top of the machine. It's not a glamorous job, but it's just one of those things that has to be done. Alright, so now here we have our cuts marked, and the measured and the actual with a little arrow, and then take the piece here and we slide it up, get it even. And we check for fit. Now, there's our cut mark, and there's a cut mark, there's a cut mark. I'm leaving about 3/8 of an inch on each end. There's the cut mark. There's that one. And there's that one, which we probably don't need that much, but you know, I'd rather have too much as not enough, because I just want to do this one time. I don't want to have to come back and cut some more, so we'll just cut a little more than we need. And that ought to work just fine. So that will adapt our TR-22 overhead for a TR-70. All finished with the sawing. Got our notches all sawed out. I didn't think you wanted to hear all that saw noise, so I didn't film any of that. But there's the result. And we can check for fit now, which We know it's going to, but it's always good to make sure. Okay, that's good. Now if we go here and we see, we've got about about 3/16 past the end here. And we should have about the same on the other end. And we do. Yeah. Now where that comes in to play is when all this goes together. This part right here protrudes out past the bottom frame. In other words, the part of the frame that this bolts onto, the top of the lower frame. And it's only 8 inches, I believe. And if we check, right here, this is about 8 5/8. Okay, hold that thought. Okay, here is the piece. That's where it would normally sit in the machine. And the bridge compartment bolts there. And if we look at that, that is 8 inches. And so at 8 1/2, the front of the bridge is going to sit right about here. It's going to be forward onto this lower piece about 2/3 of the way. And that's why we needed to cut to make allowances to let these pieces sit inside the upper part, because the 22 didn't have these, so there was nothing sticking up there. 70 was, well, it had a lot more capabilities and a lot more indicators than a 22 had, so they needed those as a place to locate the connections for all the indicators to connect to the wiring harness. And believe me, there's a bunch of them. You'll see them in one of the upcoming videos when we start putting all this stuff back together again. I must say, I'm very, very happy with how the TR-22 frame has turned out. It's got a few minor differences with a later TR-70, but not many, just, you know, a couple here and there. And of course that connection there with the overbridge was one of them. I still have a little yet to do with this frame as far as some painting and a little bit of cleaning up. I think I'm going to just stay with this earlier trim piece. You know, the 70s, this piece was painted blue, And of course this is just aluminum here, and this wears a lot better over time. You know, paint tends to scratch off and peel off, and but aluminum, you can just shine it up a little bit and it looks just as good as it ever did. And I think the 70s were all mostly gray for mica. I'm kind of partial to the earlier, the ivory looking for mica. That's kind of old style look. And speaking of old style, that is the TR-22 overlay for the transport. And it's 95% the same as a TR-70. The main difference being right here, a 22 was still using the front surface erase, the full erase head. So the tape came around this guide and below the erase head and went into the video head guide. So this head rode on the oxide side of the tape. The 70, they changed that to the backside erase head, which would be here, and they moved this roller guide down so you would have sufficient tape pressure against the backside of this erase head. And that's basically the only change that I've encountered overlaying this earlier overlay onto the TR-70 transport casting. And it's got a little embossed design in it, kind of like a sine wave. And it has a certain patina that you only get in a smoke-filled room for 20 years or more. It has that old smoky patina. So I think I'll stick with the earlier overlay for the transport just because, it's kind of an old school thing. And the TR-70 overlay is really not good shape at all. If I had to use that one, I'd probably just cut a new one out of a new piece of 063 aluminum. And that's a lot of work, and then I'd still have to paint it or have it powder coated. And that's even more work and expense. So I've got this cool old TR-22 overlay that's, I guess I'm going to go with. And so it'll live on in its new life as a TR-70. Now, here was a piece that I was really about to write off. If you had seen the earlier video where I was removing the rear shelf, and it was ratty and rusty and just, it was a mess where the rats had been living on it for 30 years or more. This is the bottom side, and the bottom side was just fine, except for a little bit of rust right down in this channel, which I was able to take a wire wheel and a drill and clean that up pretty good, and then paint it with a little bit of rust primer and some aluminum paint. So that's probably good enough for the back side. Now the front side is what I'm really happy with. I was able to sand this rusty side with some 60 grit sandpaper on an electrical sander, you know, a high-speed vibrating sander. And man, that really did a job on all that rust, to the point that it was good enough to paint afterwards. So that's what I wound up doing with the top side, was just completely going over it with some number 60 grit and an electric sander, and just grinding away all that rust spots down to good metal, and then using some rust inhibiting filler primer, and then some nice gray hammer tone paint, which is basically it's about the same shade as the rest of the frame anyway. So I really don't know why they didn't paint that part, to be honest. I mean, it's not an electrical bonding point or anything like that, and even if it was, you can use star washers, to get a good mechanical connection. But we still have some rust issues down around the bottom that I need to clean up and paint. And what happened here is, some years ago, somebody welded some wheels to the bottom of the frame, and of course, when they did that, the heat burnt the paint off, and of course it rusted, I guess, after that, from maybe wet mops slapping against it, when the floor was mopped, that sort of thing. So it's kind of minor as far as, that. It just needs to be cleaned up and primed, and then repainted the bottom section here. And again, this is nothing, if you remember in the earlier videos, this is nothing like the rust on the original TR-70 frame, which would have been hard to deal with without cutting some pieces out and welding some new metal in. So this is just, just a fairly simple and easy fix here, and we'll get this going in no time and back to a good condition once again. Those are the module rails out of the TR-70 that I've cleaned up, and there's still some of the old yellow clear lacquer that's still on the aluminum. I may just leave that alone, or I may use some Scotch-Brite to take some more of that off. It doesn't really matter. It's clean, and that's what counts. If it looks like it's 50 years old, well, that's because it is 50 years old. But it's no longer a dirty mess. It's nice and clean, and just showing its age, I guess. Well, back inside once again after all the sanding and painting. And I must say, I'm very happy with how it all turned out. The bottom part of the frame, it was had some rust, not anything very serious, just mostly surface, and mostly it was around the wheels where the welder had burned the paint off, you know, when the wheels were welded on. But that all cleaned up and painted very nicely once again. And so that's going to work out pretty good. I'm not really going for a full restoration here. There wouldn't be any point to do that, number one. And it's over 50 years old, so it's going to show its age and have some patina, wear and paint fading over the years. That's not really a concern to me as long as it's functional and clean. But down on the bottom where we did have some rust, that is a problem and it needed to be addressed and corrected. So wherever I find, something that's, rust or some sort of a structural thing, then I will go ahead and correct that, and make any repairs. But as far as trying to make it new again, there's no point to do that. I mean, it's an old machine, and it's going to be an old machine no matter what you do to it. And so it's just maintaining is basically what I'm aiming for. Make a good solid machine once again. Also, while I have had the bridge off, cutting on it for the 70B mods, I also sanded and painted the top, which was getting to be pretty rusty. And so it's looking good once again. Nice and clean and fresh coat of paint. Now as things begin to go back together, where we stopped with the paint on the bottom, we have a frame piece here that bolts back in, and this is what the module rails attaches to. And so you have a little bit of an overlap there, which when this piece is bolted back on, see, that goes right over the top of the overlap. And so that's how that works. I'm still having a debate over which overlay to use. I really like the earlier, the TR-22 overlay. It's close, it's not an exact overlay. And in order for me to use that one, here's how far off we are. That's the main roller guide. And then here's how far off the erase head is. And then when you get up here to the tension arms, see, we're off about the same amount. that would have to be changed in order to use the 22. This is the 70B overlay, and what's most concerning is the pitting. See, that's actually pitting in the surface of the metal. It's not just the paint or the powder coat, that's actually down in the metal. I don't know if I can sand that or fill it. Maybe if I sanded some of that down and then used the filler primer to finish filling up the pits, that may work. I don't know. There's a lot of it, and that's from years of loading and unloading tapes and letting the tape rewind at a high speed, and the end of the tape whips around, and it does that. It puts little scratches in the surface, and over time you can just imagine how many thousands of reels, and it would have taken, to put that many pits in. So that's the tape edge, and that's fingernails, taking tapes, putting tapes on and winding tapes off at high speed. So this thing has really had a lot of hours put on it. This is actually the Conrack monitor was directly over this part of the transport, and that is actually the silicone filler between the CRT and the safety glass. It turned to a liquid, and it dripped out the bottom of the monitor down on to the transport here, and it dried, and it's set up like concrete. And I wonder if paint remover would take that off. Maybe a paint remover solution and a putty knife might get the most of it off, but that stuff is really hard on there. It's, like I say, it's like concrete or epoxy almost. It's just very, very hard and stubborn. Anyway, that's the original overlay for the 70B. And I guess I'll just try some things and see how far I can get or how good I can make it, and then maybe decide later on whether to reuse this original one or maybe try to adapt the 22 overlay, which is very nice, but it does need some changes, some alterations made to it in order to fit the 70B transport casting. Anyway, so that's a little update for you on this old VTR. hope you like it, and there'll be more. Stay tuned.